The Edmonton Oilers are officially on Four Nations face-off break. On today's show, the first part of several episodes breaking down the Oilers season so far. On today's show, offense, the power play, and what the Oilers can work on going forward.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, big picture general thoughts, some offensive philosophy, the power play, the underlying numbers, and what the Oilers can work on going forward. So, at the outset, I think it's important that we start this conversation about the team's offense, the way it scores goals, with an overarching descriptor and how the Oilers go about their business. So the Oilers, the way they've been constructed, the way their roster is built, what they spend money on, fundamentally, the Oilers are telling you the offense is the strength of our team. We expect our forward group to do the bulk of the heavy lifting. And the way the Oilers are built, the types of players they have, it tells you as a viewer that they expect chance creation to be their anchor, that they are going to create so much offense from their group that whatever their defenders, as in their defensemen, and whatever their forwards give back in terms of defense, they feel that they are going to be able to create so much offense, it mitigates some of what they're going to give back defensively. Because we can be fair, this forward group is not particularly adept at two-way hockey. You know, they have individual players who are better at defense than others up front. You know, guys like Podkolzin is a little bit more of a chance suppressor. Someone like Adam Henrique, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Connor Brown, Matthias Janmark to some extent. You know, the guys you would see featured on the Oilers penalty kill have traits you would typically associate with being good at defense. So when your team is built around chance creation, volume, and playing with tempo, you have certain expectations of how you're going to play. And we'll talk about it more in the second and third segments of our show, but we might be in the midst of some type of stylistic change in the NHL because across the board, the Oilers are underperforming probably what they should in terms of just raw goal scoring because their shooting percentage is a little bit low. But at the same time, I'm also cognizant of the fact that across the NHL at large, teams are getting fewer shots on goal there. It is harder this year than it was last year to turn a scoring chance into a shot on goal. And some of that might be the way defenses are playing, that they've zeroed out certain scoring chances and there's just less room out there. Some of it might be that offensive teams are being a little bit more selective when they choose to shoot the puck, so there's fewer overall scoring chances. Because there are fewer overall scoring chances, there are naturally going to be fewer shots on goal. But I do want to dig into the data a little bit more on that on my own to try and put together some type of working theory, because I don't want to associate with what the Oilers are experiencing with the entire NHL, unless I can do it authoritatively. You know, I remember reading something in November of this season that this is part of a larger macro trend of teams kind of catching up. You know, we know sports generally work in cycles, that when one thing starts to prevail, eventually that's going to create an inefficiency somewhere else for teams and players to capitalize on. And that's typically where we see change. You know, a good example, when I first started watching hockey, 15 years ago or so, and God, do I sound old saying that, when I first started seriously watching hockey on a nightly basis, a lot of teams still ran two defensemen on their first power play. That's only in the last 10 to 15 years have we seen teams go to the 4-by-1 alignment of one defender, 4 forwards, because you want to create more offense. And we know forwards by nature, because of the position they play, their skill sets, the physical abilities you associate with playing forward are more conducive to creating offense. If we're already in an offense-first environment where we're going to have 85 to 90% of the scoring chances, the trade-off of a little slightly worse defense for another player who can positively impact offensively, that's a trade-off teams. And in hockey, where coaches are so risk-averse and so inclined to defend, to stay within their bounds because they don't want to push the envelope, because hockey is such a volatile sport, they want to control as much as they can. For something like that to catch on, that shows you an inefficiency, something that's being capitalized on. And the Oilers this year have worked through some extenuating factors, some injuries earlier in the season. You had Hyman and Arvidsson injured at the same time. Part of the reason they went out and claimed Kasperi Kapanen off of waivers. They needed to replace some guys in Warren Fogle and Dylan Holloway, whose skill sets, cycle, forecheck, a little bit of foot speed in Holloway's case. They needed to replace that. And finding the Oilers' optimal lineup is going to be the prevailing theme of the final 30 games or so of the regular season here, where it's very clear the Oilers have a lot of guys they like. They just aren't quite sure how all the pieces fit together. And I do think the fact that we are at what would be the All-Star break in a normal season, and the Oilers still haven't found what their ideal top 9 is, it's both good because the Oilers know they probably need to work out a little bit more, and there's probably another level to get to. But at the negative, it probably means the ideal alignment isn't in-house yet. And some of that's going to be addressed by the eventual return of Evander Kane, and some of that is going to be returned by whoever is added at the NHL trade deadline. And we know the Oilers are purportedly in the market for a defenseman and a forward. I have pounded my desk here on Locked On Oilers saying that they probably should be looking at a third goalie to add to the mix to serve as a backup to Stuart Skinner and to push Pickard into the emergency role, because in the playoffs, if the Oilers had to play Calvin Pickard for an extended period of time, they would probably be in a rough spot. But the last point I want to get in here before we start talking about actual numbers, the Oilers' shooting percentage does give me a little bit of pause, being that 9 of their 14 players, they're 9 of their 14 forwards who played forward for them this year, so we're not counting defensemen, are below their career averages. And it raises the question, because the Oilers, as we're going to talk about in the next segment in a minute, are such a good chance creation team, they create a ton of offense, both in terms of overall output and in terms of quality. Does that simply mean the Oilers have so much offense that they can mitigate the fact that they're not shooting the puck particularly well? It is worth conversing about, and something we're going to talk about coming up next. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you could even combine your bets into a live same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whenever I hang out with my friends, we love to do a squad ride on any particular play. That way, we're all rooting for the same thing, even if we don't particularly care about which teams are playing in the game. Never feel like you've missed a chance. And plus, the app's easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are doing our first episode in a series of what will effectively serve as mid-season checkup, report card, whatever phrase you like to use for an evaluation I am going to be away from Wednesday of this week until Tuesday of next week. So there will still be daily episodes, but they are going to be pre-recorded. So if there is, eminently important breaking news, I will put together an episode best I can on the road, but probably not going to be the prettiest thing in terms of production. Okay, back to today's episode. When we're talking about chance creation, but let's even dial it back. Let's dial it back even a bigger picture. When we are talking about offensive creation in the NHL, we are talking about how consistently can a team get the puck to the offensive zone? How much time can they sustain in the offensive zone? And what do they have to do to turn possession into goals? Because ultimately, and I made this joke a few weeks ago in a game the Oilers lost where they had a ton of possession. Possession's 9/10 of the law. Sure, 9 out of 10 times, you're in good shape if you outpossess the other team. There's a strong correlation in the time we have shot tracking data, which is 2007, 2008 to the present, that if you consistently outshoot, outchance, out expected goals your opponent over the course of an entire season, you are going to win enough games to make the playoffs. Now, just like with all large data sets, there are going to be outliers. Of the 16 teams that make the playoffs, it's usually 13 or more are in the top 13 or so of chance creation, because that level of possession is indicative of eventually being able to put the puck in the net. Because if you have the puck in the offensive zone to create scoring chances, and even if they're not particularly dangerous, most importantly, and this is where the first part of the Oilers equation comes up, you are not playing defense. If you have the puck in the offensive zone, you are cycling, you are getting the puck out to the point, you're getting a shot on goal, you're recovering a rebound, and you're restarting that process. You are putting yourself in a position where you don't have to play defense. And materially, the biggest indicator of eventually conceding a goal is being on defense. And yes, for all of the people who are listening to this and saying, well, what about own goals and deflections and accidents? Yeah, of course there are accidents where pucks go into your own net. Tony DeAngelo had 2 of them the other night for the Islanders. That is part of hockey. It is a volatile, high event sport where any little difference, any change in variable, whether we're talking about like the smoothness of the ice, if the puck is as frozen as it needs to be, if a stick breaks in the midst of a pass or a shot, there are so many individual variables going on. Where's the referee standing? Where's the linesman standing? Does the puck hit one of them? How does it react off of the boards? Are you playing in an arena that has lively boards or dead boards? There are so many variables when we're talking about hockey that it's impossible to account for them all. So when we look at chance creation, the Oilers grade out very favorably in all of the key metrics. In terms of raw percentage, they create 54% of the scoring chances in their game. That is the 3rd best in the entire NHL. In terms of the chances, the number, they create them at the 3rd highest rate. In terms of shots, the 2nd highest rate. Goals, 8th. Expected goals, 7th. High danger chances, 1st. You might say, well, Nick, if they're 1st in high danger chances and 2nd in expected goals, why are they only 8th in actual goals for per 60 minutes? So, being that you asked, which I'm glad you did, the key here at 5-on-5, and we'll talk about the power play later, they are shooting 8.2% at 5-on-5. That is the 26th highest rate in the NHL, bottom 6 in the NHL. And that tells you that on some level, the Oilers are having a ton of possession, but they're not necessarily converting those chances into goals. And I would like to point out that first 10, 15 game window where the Oilers were trailing in a lot of games. And frankly, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, where the Oilers have gotten behind big in a lot of these games. And it is very easy to juice these underlying numbers if you are a team that is playing from behind a lot. because as we know in the NHL, teams that are trailing are often going to have the puck more in the back half of those games because the team that's protecting their lead is going to be more conservative and more defensive. And that's going to put them in a position where they're going to allow you to take those low quality chances. You're going to stay out on the perimeter. You're going to take point shots, and those shots have a lower correlation of going in. There's a reason defenses are going to be willing to give you that play. They're more inclined to believe you're not going to be able to score from there. And that's really the foundation of this point, if you will. The Oilers have the puck a ton. And that is a good thing. Even in the games they're losing and they have a ton of possession because they're chasing, because they're trying to get back in the game, they're running Connor, Leon, Hyman, Ekholm, and Bouchard down the stretch of these games as much as they can when they're behind, and they have possession. The problem is teams know that you're going to be desperate and you're going to be pushing as hard as you possibly can to score. So they are going to change how they approach you defensively. They are going to try and close you out. They are going to try and keep you to the outside and force you to work harder. And that brings me back to a point I made on the episode the night of, it was the episode right after Game 7 of the Cup final against Florida. There was one sequence in Game 7 where the Oilers established offensive zone possession. They had the goalie pulled, and it took the Oilers 14 passes to register one shot on goal. And that type of efficiency where you need to successfully string together that many passes in a row consecutively is very difficult. It's very unlikely. We see this a lot in the other sports as well. We see this a lot in football now, where defenses are going to let you run a 12, 13, 14, 15 play drive, but you stall out in the red zone and you only get a field goal as opposed to a touchdown. And this is in the same vein. They're going to let you have all the zone time you want if it's along the perimeter. And if you can't register a shot, especially if you're trailing and you need to make up a deficit, they're more than content to let you get your cardio in around the perimeter of the offensive zone. And the low shooting percentage, especially for a team that has some high-end talent, I do think that's interesting in terms of understanding the Oilers' issues, if you will. To be 26th in 5-on-5 shooting percentage and 20th in overall shooting percentage, all situations, on a team that has a lot of shooting talent, but when you have 9 of your 14 forwards under their career averages so far in shooting percentage, it begs a question of, is the environment different? Are the Oilers as a team doing something different? And I think it's probably a little bit of both. I don't think they are entirely separate ideas. I don't think they aren't codependent. I think a lot of these environmental factors are, if anything, codependent. One is based on the other. And with the Oilers being behind a lot early in the season and over the last few weeks, I think you're going to find in those games, they're going to spend a lot of time in the offensive zone chasing the game and trying to get their goals back to get back to the lead. But in doing that, you are going to have to work a lot harder. And it's not that you can't be successful like this as a volume team with a low shooting percentage. It's just that in the postseason, which is typically where we evaluate how a team with the expectations that the Oilers do, that's where we evaluate how good they are. We have seen consistently and historically that teams like this, that have the ton of volume, they have good looks, they have good danger, they create dangerous offense as well. They don't and they have a low shooting percentage. That tells you that something in their equation is off, because if they were creating as good of scoring chances as the underlying numbers say, they would have a higher shooting percentage, because the higher your shooting percentage, the more of your shots have gone in. The more of your shots have gone in, the more likely it is you are creating dangerous ones, because if they were lower quality, they would be less likely to go in. There's some dependent logic in there you have to kind of unpack to understand, but I do think we're going to take our second and final break of today's show. When we come back, we'll hit the power play real quick because we went long in that second segment. And then we'll do an overarching, what can we work on going forward, coming up next. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Did you just realize your business needed to hire someone like yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates fast. I've been in that spot where you need to hire like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day your team is missing the right person. That's a setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure the post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now, you can speed up your hiring process with the $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are navigating the Four Nations face-off break. So the content plan is as follows. We are going to have an episode on the team's offense, which you are listening to right now, defense, goaltending, the front office and coaching. Those will be one episode together. We'll do a Four Nations face-off preview episode. I've got a guest lined up, so we'll talk Oilers on a bit more of a macro level. And then we do need to do one more episode before I am back and able to record in person. I haven't figured out what we're going to do for that one yet, but those are your next 6 episodes of Locked On Oilers laid out for you. We're going to take a second here to talk about the Oilers power play, because this is an area where I have felt all year the Oilers have had opportunities and they're just a smidge off. And a power play in particular is like a fine instrument, like you think about like a premium watch and all of the little keys and cogs that have to line up for the machinery to work, to keep the clock winding on time, to keep the machinery working, if you will. Same thing with an engine, any type of complex machine where you've got a lot of codependent factors working on each other. And the Oilers power play is just a smidge off last year in terms of its underlying chance creation. Slightly lower rate of scoring chances, slightly lower rate of high danger chances, slightly lower rate of expected goals. And it's not going to be a surprise for you to hear me say, and a lower shooting percentage. That is an area where when you compare the metrics to the shooting percentage, it makes perfect sense. If you're creating lower danger chances, they're less likely to go in. Zach Hyman had a career year last year. That's a 54 goal scorer who's going to finish probably south of 30 for the season, unless he gets on a real heater down the stretch here. McDavid, only 22 goals at this point in the season. I know McDavid doesn't profile as, a 40, 50 goal guy, but you're kind of expecting a little bit more offensively out of him. And look, this is going to sound silly, and I've said this more than once over the last 2 weeks or so. Leon's having a Hart Trophy caliber season. I think if they gave out the award today, he deserves to win it. He's left some gains on the table too, as far as the power play. That one-timer hasn't been as deadly as it's been in years past. He's got, I think, 11 power play goals on the season, and he's been, undoubtedly, he's been the best player in the NHL this year. But again, I'm not saying he's playing poorly. He's just not in a position. 11 power play goals. Yes, I was correct. I just wanted to fact check that before I continued. But he's missed open nets. And that's not nitpicking. I am not saying he's having a bad season. I am saying they've missed some open nets on the power play, that their power play is a little bit worse than it was last year. And their power play's underlying numbers are a little bit more, I don't want to say meh, but the power play numbers are not as impressive as the 5-on-5 numbers. They give back quite a lot in terms of chances against on the power play. And look, we are nitpicking the defense and, the chance prevention of a power play unit that's top 10 in the NHL. But for a unit that is this good, to be conceding the chances they do on the power play, going back the other way, 28th in expected goals against, 29th in chances against, that's not great. High danger chances against, their 28th as well. That tells you one thing. That tells you two things, actually. I want to use my phraseology, my words here correctly. Number one, it tells you the Oilers get the puck into really dangerous areas, that they're down low, but it also tells you Their power play is volatile because they want to get down into that phone booth. You know, we talk a lot about how the Oilers want to make it, instead of a 5-on-4, they want to make it a 4-on-3 in confined space where Connor can go to Nuge on a flank, Hyman on the back door, or Draisaitl for the one-timer where he himself can take that shot. And when you have 4 guys compressed down by the goal line, that means you only have your Bouchard at the point. You have your one guy back. So if the defending team, the penalty killing team, can get a stick in the lane, it's really easy for them to create a 2-on-1 going back the other way on Evan Bouchard. And look, Evan Bouchard's defense is overly criticized because his offense is so valuable. It's just that some people look at his defense and it frustrates them. And look, I get it, but he's a positioning-based defender. If you are asking a guy who's not a burner on his feet, he doesn't have a crazy reach, he's not overly big, so he can't, use his size to clog lanes. If you're asking a guy to purely play on read and react, and he's not this elite physical talent, you're going to be conceding. You have to accept the level of giving it back the other way. That's just fundamentally how this works. If someone's not good at something, but they're really good at something else, and you accept what they're good at, you're going to have to take those drawbacks. That's just kind of part of life. Nobody's perfect. Nobody, like even the most prototypical archetype defenseman like Victor Hedman, they have holes in their game. And look, I know Hedman at this point in his career is kind of winding down as being a peak player, but Hedman at his peak a couple years ago, the size, the skating, the offensive instincts, the prototypical defenseman, well-rounded, had leadership components as well. Evan Bouchard's not that. And the Oilers' power play hasn't been as good as it was last year. It's not a huge drop-off. They're not playing terribly to be a 25% power play this year. One thing I do think that's worth pointing out, and I have to go do some more research, they aren't generating that many power play opportunities at large. They're only generating 2.5 per game. They convert on a 25% rate, which is in the top 10, which is good. But it does feel like for a team that has this much offensive zone time, they probably should be generating more power play opportunities, because you would think offensive zone time, wear the other team down. And we always say you want to maintain that zone time to generate either a scoring chance or to draw a penalty, because even if you don't score and you draw that penalty, well, you just almost doubled your chance statistically of scoring a goal going from 5-on-5 to 5-on-4. But at large, the Oilers' underlying numbers are tremendous. They're top 10 across the board in the chance creation. Their shooting percentage being low is a slight cause for concern, being that they have so many players underperforming their career averages. But the glass half full of that, which we talked about on Friday, there's room for these guys like Hyman and Adam Henrique to play closer to their career averages. And then the second half of the season, we don't talk about the shooting percentage because they bounce back to where they're supposed to be. That's how regression works. You can't know until you play. Maybe the Oilers are having 9 guys who are just having bad shooting years. I think that's unlikely, though, based on what we know about math. All right, that'll do it for the first episode of this rewind, audit, recap, report card, check-in, whatever you want to call these series of episodes, counting the Oilers' first 55 regular season games. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please drop the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the alarm bell, hit the subscribe button, get a notification whenever new content goes live. Talk to you guys tomorrow when we talk about the Oilers defense. Until then, let's go Oilers.